Ladies and gentlemen, jealousy doesn't walk into your life with a loud entrance. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or break dishes. No, it slips in quietly. It disguises itself as care, concern, or even love. But underneath that mask, it's a parasite feeding on your peace, your trust, and eventually your relationships. It starts small, a little suspicion, a hint of insecurity, a quiet comparison. You start measuring someone else's smile, their success, their story against yours. And before you realize it, admiration turns into resentment. Love turns into control. Friendship becomes rivalry. Partnership becomes paranoia. Jealousy makes us assume the worst, expect betrayal, and withhold support. It builds walls where there should be bridges. It causes lovers to doubt, friends to compete, and families to fall apart. Not because of what someone did, but because of what we feared they might do. Jealousy is rarely loud in its early stages. It doesn't come with flashing warning signs or dramatic confrontations. Instead, it often hides in silence, quietly disguised as something more acceptable, even noble concern, care, or protection. This is why it's so dangerous, because when jealousy enters a relationship, it doesn't appear as a threat. It looks like love. It sounds like worry. It feels like attention. But underneath those layers is a slow, corrosive force that begins to eat away at the very foundation of any healthy connection: trust. In relationships, this disguised jealousy often begins with subtle questions or slight discomfort. A partner may ask who you were talking to, how long you were gone, or why you didn't reply quickly enough. These questions may seem harmless at first, even affectionate. After all, isn't it normal for someone who cares about you to ask? But when these questions become consistent and are driven by fear, suspicion, or control rather than genuine interest, they reveal something deeper. Jealousy has arrived quietly, wearing the mask of concern. Over time, that concern becomes possessiveness. I just want to protect you. Turns into, I don't want you around certain people. I worry about you becomes, I need to check your phone. These shifts are gradual and often justified by the one feeling jealous. They may believe they are just being cautious or attentive. But in reality, they are allowing jealousy to make decisions for them. The relationship begins to change. Communication becomes filtered, freedom becomes limited, and the other person begins to feel watched rather than loved. That's when trust starts to erode piece by piece. What makes this erosion so subtle is that it rarely starts with open conflict. Most people don't shout about their jealousy at first. Instead, they hold it in. They suppress it, but the emotions remain festering in silence, twisting their perception and increasing their anxiety. They start to interpret harmless actions as threats. A friendly hug becomes flirtation. A compliment from someone else feels like competition. The mind begins to fill in blanks with worst-case scenarios, and before long, even the most innocent moments are covered in suspicion. The silent jealousy also affects how people give and receive affection. The person experiencing it might withdraw emotionally, not because they've stopped caring, but because they fear getting hurt. Or they might overcompensate, calling constantly, needing reassurance, repeatedly clinging to the relationship in an attempt to feel secure. But none of this builds trust. Instead, it chips away at it. The relationship becomes strained, not by any real wrongdoing, but by imagined threats amplified by insecurity. What's even more painful is how often jealousy is confused with love. People say he's just jealous because he loves me, or she only acts like that because she cares. But real love is built on freedom, not fear. Real concern nurtures. It doesn't control. True protection doesn't limit or isolate. It empowers. When jealousy hides beneath the surface, pretending to be these things, it creates confusion. It causes people to stay in relationships where they feel emotionally restricted, manipulated, or constantly doubted, all while believing it's what love looks like. Trust, once shaken by jealousy, is hard to repair. The one who feels controlled starts hiding things. Not because they're guilty, but because they're tired of being questioned. They become defensive, and the cycle deepens. Jealousy begets more jealousy, and both people become emotionally exhausted. The love that once held them together now feels like a battleground where no one wins. That's the silent power of jealousy. It doesn't scream, it doesn't storm in, it whispers doubt, plants fear, and chips away at confidence and trust until all that's left is distance wrapped in the illusion of closeness. Jealousy is a complex emotion that often begins in a place we don't expect: admiration. When we admire someone, we see something in them that inspires us. It could be their success, their confidence, their beauty, or even the attention they receive from others. At first, admiration feels good, it motivates us, it reminds us of what's possible. But if we're not careful, that admiration can slowly shift into something darker: resentment. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual, subtle, and often unspoken. We begin to feel that what they have should belong to us. We start to question why they're succeeding and we're not. The admiration that once lifted our spirit now becomes a burden, a reminder of what we lack instead of what we could become. This emotional change often stems from internal insecurity. When we're not confident in our own worth, someone else's strengths begin to highlight our perceived weaknesses. The very qualities we once appreciated start to make us feel small. We compare their path to ours, their timeline to ours, their victories to our setbacks. And when we feel like we're losing in that comparison, admiration gives way to bitterness. We might not express it openly, but internally we begin to resent them for having what we feel we deserve. We stop cheering for them, we stop being happy for them, and eventually we start distancing ourselves emotionally or physically. The same thing happens in relationships. Jealousy transforms genuine connection to constant comparison. Instead of enjoying someone's presence, we evaluate ourselves against them. In friendships, we might notice how easily they make connections, how popular they are, or how often others praise them. In romantic relationships, we might compare how much attention our partner gives us versus others. What used to be a bond based on shared experiences and mutual respect becomes a competition, spoken or unspoken. We measure our value based on how we stack up against the other person, and this mindset slowly breaks down the connection. Comparison fueled by jealousy is dangerous because it creates false narratives. We start assuming things that aren't true. We imagine that the other person is trying to outshine us, or that they secretly enjoy being one step ahead. We interpret their wins as our losses. Their joy becomes our pain. Even their kindness might seem like pity in our jealous eyes. This distortion causes distance. We stop being open. We stop being honest. We stop feeling safe. Instead, we hide our feelings, put on a mask, or try to outdo the other person just to feel equal again. Over time, this emotional competition damages the foundation of any relationship. Trust fades. Authenticity is replaced by performance. Vulnerability disappears because we don't want to show weakness to someone we secretly resent or envy. The connection that once brought joy now brings pressure and tension. We feel like we're always being measured, always being judged, even when no one is actually doing that. It's all happening in our mind, but it affects everything we do. What makes this even harder is that many people don't recognize when this transformation is happening, because admiration and jealousy can look similar on the surface. Both involve strong feelings toward another person, but the energy is different. Admiration empowers, jealousy drains. Admiration celebrates, jealousy competes. And when jealousy takes root, even the deepest connections can suffer. The love or respect we once had becomes overshadowed by a constant need to compare, to prove, to measure, and instead of growing together, we grow apart. Jealousy is often seen as a reaction to what someone else is doing, how they look, what they have, who they know, or the attention they receive. But in reality, jealousy is rarely about the other person. It is almost always a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. When we experience jealousy, it usually means there's something inside us that feels lacking, unworthy, or threatened. The emotion gets triggered not because the other person has done something wrong, but because their success, beauty, talent, or attention reminds us of something we believe we don't have, or something we fear losing. This is why two people can experience the same situation and react completely differently. One person may genuinely celebrate someone else's achievement, while another person may feel bitter or insecure in response to the exact same thing. The difference is not in the external event, but in the internal condition of the heart. Jealousy acts like a mirror, showing us where we feel inadequate. It exposes the parts of ourselves we haven't fully accepted, healed, or valued. When we're secure in who we are, we can admire someone else's success without feeling threatened. We can recognize another person's strengths without feeling weak. But when we lack self-confidence or self-worth, someone else's strengths start to look like our weaknesses. Their beauty makes us feel invisible. Their confidence makes us question our value. Their opportunities make us feel left behind. And even if they did absolutely nothing to hurt us or make us feel that way, their very presence becomes a trigger for our insecurity. The problem deepens when we fail to recognize that the root of our jealousy lies within. Instead of turning inward to reflect and heal, we turn outward and blame. We might accuse others of showing off or being arrogant. We might try to downplay their achievements or criticize them behind their back. All of this is an unconscious attempt to protect our fragile self-image. If we can convince ourselves that they don't deserve what they have, we feel a little less bad about not having it ourselves. But this mindset only reinforces the insecurity. It doesn't solve it. Jealousy can also distort our perceptions. We start to see people through the lens of our fears. We assume intentions that aren't there. We imagine slights that never happened, and over time, our relationships suffer, not because others did anything wrong, but because our unaddressed insecurities made it hard to trust, connect, or celebrate with them. We become guarded, distant, or overly critical. We start comparing every detail, competing silently, and resenting quietly. All of this noise plays out in our mind, yet it has real consequences in our behavior and how others experience us. The truth is, everyone has insecurities. It's part of being human. But when those insecurities are left unexamined, they can give jealousy the power to control us. The goal isn't to pretend we never feel jealous, but to understand what it's trying to tell us. Often, jealousy is a signal that there's something in ourselves we need to heal, develop, or accept. It might be a dream we gave up on, a quality we wish we had, or a fear of being left out or not being enough. When we begin to listen to jealousy with honesty instead of shame, we can use it as a tool for growth rather than a weapon against others. By owning our insecurities, instead of projecting them, we free ourselves from jealousy's grip. We stop looking at others as threats and start seeing them as mirrors or even mentors. Their success no longer feels like our failure. Their light doesn't make us feel dim. And slowly, we rebuild the kind of inner strength that no one else's actions can shake. Unchecked jealousy begins with a quiet feeling, an uneasy stirring when someone we care about gives attention elsewhere, or when someone around us shines a little too brightly. At first, it may feel like a fleeting discomfort, something we can ignore or brush off. But when we don't address it, when we let it grow unchecked, it begins to take root in our thoughts, our emotions, and eventually our actions. What starts as a small internal fear can grow into behaviors that damage the very relationships we value. The first sign of unchecked jealousy is often the desire to control. This doesn't always look extreme or obvious at first. It may begin with small questions that seem innocent, asking where someone went, who they were with, or how long they'll be gone. But over time, these questions can become demands. What was once curiosity becomes a need to monitor. We start checking phones, reading messages, or insisting on knowing every detail of someone's day. The underlying belief is that if we can control their environment, we can prevent betrayal, abandonment, or loss. But this control doesn't bring peace. It breeds tension. The more we try to hold on tightly, the more the other person begins to feel trapped. Alongside control comes suspicion. When jealousy is left unaddressed, it creates a lens through which we begin to view everything. Harmless interactions suddenly seem threatening. A smile, a laugh, a delayed response. These ordinary actions become evidence in the mind of someone consumed by jealousy. Even when there's no real cause, we start to assume the worst. We replay conversations in our head, read between lines that aren't there, and create narratives built on fear rather than fact. This suspicion creates a climate of constant doubt. Trust, which is the foundation of any healthy relationship, starts to crumble under the weight of imagined betrayals. The damage doesn't end there. As control and suspicion grow, emotional distance inevitably follows. The person experiencing jealousy becomes consumed with monitoring, questioning, and defending their insecurities. The emotional space they once used to connect and love is now filled with fear and self-protection. On the other side, the person on the receiving end begins to feel misunderstood, untrusted, and emotionally suffocated. They may pull away not because they've done something wrong, but because the relationship no longer feels safe or nurturing. What once felt like intimacy is now filled with tension, guardedness, and anxiety. Emotional distance deepens when both sides stop communicating honestly. The jealous partner may withhold their true feelings out of shame or fear of sounding irrational. The other partner may avoid conversations to prevent arguments or accusations. Slowly, silence replaces honesty. Disconnection replaces closeness. And without intentional repair, the emotional gap between them grows wider. Ironically, the fear that started it all, losing the relationship, becomes more likely to come true. Not because of another person, but because of the unchecked jealousy itself. Unchecked jealousy turns relationships into battlegrounds. Every interaction feels like a test. Every compliment like a threat. Every absence like a betrayal. It creates a cycle where love is no longer free. It's measured, watched, and controlled. And in that kind of environment, relationships cannot thrive. People cannot be fully themselves when they're constantly questioned or doubted. They begin to walk on eggshells, say less, do less, and feel less just to keep the peace. But peace built on fear is not real peace. It's emotional survival. The tragedy is that most people don't intend to harm the ones they love. Their jealousy is often rooted in deep fears of not being enough, of being abandoned, of being replaced. But when these fears are erect, unspoken, and unmanaged, they manifest in harmful ways. The very love they are trying to protect gets pushed away, not by the actions of another, but by their own attempts to guard it too tightly. Healing from jealousy and the damage it causes begins within. It doesn't start with changing someone else's behavior or proving anything to the outside world. True healing starts when we pause and look inward with honesty and courage. At the heart of that process is self-awareness. Without it, we can't see the patterns that jealousy creates in our lives. We remain stuck in cycles of control, suspicion, and insecurity. But when we become aware of our thoughts and the emotions driving them, we gain power. We begin to understand that jealousy often isn't about the other person at all. It's about our own fears, doubts, and unmet needs. Self-awareness allows us to notice when jealousy is speaking rather than letting it take control. It helps us recognize the exact moment we start to compare ourselves to someone else or feel threatened by their presence. It reveals where we feel unworthy, insecure, or overlooked. This isn't always comfortable. It can be painful to admit that we're struggling with feelings we may not be proud of, but it's necessary. The more we observe our thoughts and ask ourselves why we feel jealous in certain moments, the more we can separate truth from assumption and fear from reality. That's when real healing begins, when we take responsibility for our emotions rather than projecting them onto others. Alongside self-awareness, gratitude plays a powerful role in healing. Jealousy thrives in a mindset of scarcity, the belief that there isn't enough love, success, attention, or happiness to go around. It convinces us that if someone else has something good, it means there's less left for us. Gratitude shifts that mindset completely. It reminds us of what we already have, who we already are, and what is already working in our lives. When we focus on our blessings, no matter how small, we begin to see abundance instead of lack. We become less focused on what others are doing and more grounded in our own journey. Practicing gratitude rewires the way we view the world. Instead of seeing others as competition, we see them as inspiration. Instead of being consumed by what we lack, we find joy in what we've gained. This doesn't mean we ignore pain or pretend we don't struggle. It simply means we train our minds to notice what's good instead of only what's missing. Gratitude helps quiet the noise of jealousy by creating space for appreciation, both for ourselves and others. And in that space, healing can grow. The final part of the healing process is rebuilding trust. This begins with trusting ourselves again, believing that we are enough, worthy, and capable of having healthy relationships without needing to control or compare. Rebuilding trust means letting go of past stories that tell us we're not lovable or that we'll always be replaced. It means learning to separate old wounds from present situations. That inner trust creates a foundation of emotional safety. From there, we can begin to rebuild trust with others. This external trust grows through consistent honesty, open communication, and patience. It requires us to be vulnerable even when it's uncomfortable, to express when we feel triggered instead of acting out in fear, to listen with empathy instead of reacting with judgment. Trust takes time, especially if it's been broken. But every honest conversation, every moment of restraint, every act of kindness slowly repairs what jealousy once damaged. It's not about perfection, it's about intention, choosing to grow instead of repeating harmful patterns. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds through daily choices, choosing self-awareness over denial, gratitude over comparison, and trust over fear. Each choice becomes a step forward, and over time, those steps create a path away from the pain of jealousy and toward the freedom of peace, wholeness, and deeper connection. So, jealousy is not just a fleeting emotion. It is a silent killer that slowly poisons trust, love, and connection. If left unchecked, it disguises itself as care, but corrodes from within. It turns admiration into resentment, comparison into conflict, and presence into suspicion. But we are not powerless against it. Healing begins when we courageously look inward, when we choose self-awareness over blame, gratitude over comparison, and trust over control. It's in these quiet choices that we begin to break jealousy's grip and rebuild the relationships it tried to destroy. Let us not be fooled by the silence in which jealousy hides. Let us face it, name it, and rise above it. Because true love, whether in friendships, family, or romance, can only grow in the soil of trust, honesty, and emotional freedom. The journey isn't easy, but it's worth every step. Thank you.